you guys can see here. Okay, and so it is made of 5 different components: verbal comprehension, visual spatial index, fluid reasoning, working memory, and processing speed. And depending on your child's age, they may be tested on all of these or only some of these. And we can go into how their ages play into that. And as you guys can see over here as well, that's how the IQ score is tested. Okay. Yes, so as I was saying earlier, depending on your child's age, it really depends. It's really important to gauge which ones of these components they will be tested on. So for something like the WPPSI, your child, if they're between 2 years and 6 months to 3 years and 11 months, then they will be only tested on 3 modules. So the verbal comprehension, visual spatial, and working memory index. And this is normally for pre-K and transitioning kindergarten when they're entering private schools. For kindergarten, they would be most likely around 4 years old to 6 years and 6 months. And for that, they would be tested on all 5. So verbal comprehension index, visual spatial, so on, fluid reasoning, processing speed. And finally, if you're above 6-year-old, you will be tested on all of them. And once you're past 6-year-old, you will be actually taking the WISC instead of the WPPSI. Okay. Now, so we've gone over the different IQ tests, but we haven't really talked about what's really inside these tests, right? What do they actually test? So we're going to be going over all these 3 tests, but we're mostly going to be focusing on the first one. So the WPPSI and the WISC tests. So for the first one, verbal comprehension, as you guys can see here, there are some sample questions that are commonly seen for this portion of the IQ tests. So for example, the first one, which says, which of these protects your eyes? So your child would need to not only know the functionalities of these items in daily life, but also how to express them, right? They would need to be able to point to them, say sunglasses or something like that in order to answer this question correctly. So for the first 2, they are able to just look at the questions and point. But for something like the bottom one, which goes, which part of the bus goes round and round, for example, they would have to say something like wheels, right? There's no picture for them to point to. They have to be able to express themselves and know what a wheel is. And finally, down here at the bottom, something like, why shouldn't you eat dessert before your meal is a question that they could ask. A 1-point answer would be something like, it's not healthy. It's very simple, straight to the point, but doesn't really explain why you shouldn't eat dessert before the meal, right? The 2-point answer would answer that. They would say that you have to eat the healthiest food first or something like that. So they would have to really know how to express themselves and know the vocabulary in order to score well in this section. Okay, let's move on to visual spatial reasoning, right? So in this portion, I'm sure many of you have seen maybe problems that look like this. This portion tests your kids' observation skills, fine motor skills, as well as problem-solving skills, right? So in this portion, most likely they would be given like a sequence of patterns, as you guys can see, and also be given a bunch of cards with different patterns, and they would need to either rotate or try to fit in these shapes to match the pattern, right? And something that's really key in this section is that we want to teach our kids to use directional terms like left or right or up or down, things like that, in order to help guide them through this section, instead of just saying, oh, put it like this or put it like that. We really want to emphasize how we use the terms to make this portion talked about. We also like to use tools like puzzles and things like that. Okay. Oh, now we're talking about working memory. Okay, this is the third part of the WPPSI. So the working memory, as you guys can see, really tests like the short-term memory, right? So your child would most likely have to remember 2 shapes or 2 items and have to pick them out from a list of more items. And tests have shown that this in particular is really correlated to learning efficiency in the future. So this is something that can definitely be worked on, and this is something that can definitely be practiced, right? And in particular, working memory is really important for future math and reading. It helps in reading, it helps with understanding context, right? We read something and we really understand the context if we remember what we just read, as well as mental calculation for math. Okay, now let's move on to processing speed. For this portion, you most likely your child will be given a sheet like this, and they will be given items like a kite, a balloon, or like a paper airplane, and they will be matched with a symbol. And for this part down here, they would need to match that symbol with the shape as fast as they can. This portion is normally like, let's say they'll be giving a time limit of 2 minutes, and they'll be gauged on how fast they can complete this as well as their accuracy. So this portion really tests how quickly and efficiently they can distinguish and process visual information. And finally, we have fluid reasoning. And this part, I think, would actually be the most combination of different aspects of intelligence. So this portion tests not only observational skills, but as well as finding patterns and using common sense. So for something like the first one, your child would need to recognize that a straw and a glass of water have a relationship, right? You use the straw to drink from the water, and they would need to use that information and extrapolate to another scenario. So for example, the ice cream down here, right? They wouldn't need to have the logical reasoning to know that, oh, we wouldn't really use chopsticks to eat ice cream, right? So we would use something like a spoon, and that's how you would do this problem. And same thing down here. This is actually a little bit more difficult. So something like nighttime and daytime, right? What is the relationship? The relationship is that they're opposites, right? And what is the opposite of a green light? It would be something like stop, right? And same goes for over here. We're trying to look for the relationship between these two images and extrapolate that to a new image. Okay, and so let's move on to the CogAt test. This is, in comparison to the other test, one of the more painful IQ tests. And it is for, at least in the Bay Area, mainly for the North Star Academy school, where they test, I think, third graders using this test. So this test, they test 3 portions. So it would be cognition, number sense, and picture sense. So 2 things to keep in mind about this test, though. It takes a very long time, 2 to 3 hours, and there are a lot of questions, 120 to 180. And generally, you would need to score between 95 to 98% in order to, have a good chance. So for the first portion is cognition. Okay, so just like what we saw before with the fluid reasoning, it's very similar to that, right? So recognizing patterns, recognizing that, oh, what is the relationship between a doghouse and a dog, right? The dog lives in the doghouse, something like that. And we would have to extrapolate here to think that, oh, what would live in a bird's nest? Probably a bird, right? And over here, we would have something like pattern recognition, right? What is in common with all three of these animals, right? They're all water animals, so it'd be something like D. However, this portion also requires your child to have a good sense of daily life, a good sense of common sense. For something down here, they would need to know what a toolbox is and know what are the things that usually generally go in a toolbox in order to answer this question below. So it really focuses on real life examples. Okay, for number sense, the CogAt actually emphasizes numbers a lot more than the previous test we talked about. So for example, something like this, it would be your kid would need to know how to count 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? There would be 7 here. They would need to really know the relationships between numbers, and that's something that's really important for the CogAt test. Okay, and finally, much like the previous test before, there's also a picture sense. There's also a spatial reasoning aspect, right? So something like this is a very, very common problem that is found in a lot of math problems as well. So something like folding the paper and trying to see, oh, if we fold the paper like this, where would the holes line up, right? And we would have to pick it out of these options and see if we have the imagination and the spatial awareness capabilities in order to identify which one of these would be correct. Okay, and finally, the GCA is really just tied to tessellations, the school, right? So it's really non-standardized, qualitative rather than quantitative, and pays more attention to different students' personal characteristics, right? Whether they're, good at music, good at math, good at English, really depends on, how the interviewer gauges their abilities. Okay, but something that's really important after talking about all of this IQ stuff is that IQ score definitely is not just an absolute indicator of intelligence level, right? So just because you have a high IQ, that doesn't mean that you'll absolutely have success in the future. And IQ score is only a relative parameter, and there is still debate whether there's more influence on IQ score, whether it's nature or nurture, right? Whether preparing or practicing more will change your IQ score. So here are some common misconceptions given this, the frequent IQ debate. Children are born with a certain IQ and it can never change, right? So while this is still a hotly contested subject, it is definitely cannot be set for certain that children are just born with a certain IQ and that it will never change, right? So if your child fails a test once, that doesn't mean that they're just bad at this type of test and no type of preparation will help, right? So our only goal in preparing for the IQ test is to get a high score. Well, that's not the only goal of preparing or practicing these skills as a young child, right? Just because you get a high score, that shouldn't be as important as practicing our cognitive abilities or using our skills in real life. And finally, while many of you might think that preparing for an IQ test could be best done so by doing a lot of practice problems, I know I've done a lot of practice problems myself for standardized tests. For IQ tests, actually, if the interviewer or the psychologist realizes that your kid has seen a lot of these problems before, then they might actually cancel the test because IQ test isn't testing their preparation, but rather their innate abilities on intelligence. Okay, so as we emphasized before, we're not just preparing our children for an IQ test, right? We want to prepare them for enhancing their cognitive abilities that will benefit them throughout their entire lifetime. So, especially in this young age, from birth all the way up to 10 years old, their childhood brain is in the golden period of brain development, and it's really important in this period to stimulate it and do different things in order to stimulate their brain development. So how can we do that, right? So we need to do 3 things to cultivate this learning, not only at school, but at home, right? So number one, a good atmosphere really plays into helping a child's brain develop, right? An environment that's suitable for learning. Utilizing ourselves as good role models, I think, is really important. That really changes how a child thinks in the future, right? They're most in contact with their parents, and also starting from a child's interests rather than just standard activities that a child should do. Effective companionship interaction with the parents is also really important. So listening to the language that we use, the children will pick that up, as well as designing child and parent games and competitions, to boost that learning at home. And finally, most importantly, actually, is long-term persistence, right? Like no matter what we do, having long-term persistence really enacts change. So no matter what it is, as long as we do it for a while, we can really start to see this change in brain development over time. Okay, and so here are some good YouTube channels, some recommendations from Think Academy. So something like the Dad Lab or Fun Science. These are really good YouTube channels for your child to watch, and that really helps them simulate their brain activity. I'll give everybody some time to look at these. Okay. And we also have games that we recommend. Something like Number Sense. This is a really good game for Tiny Polka Dot, or 10 Frame is a really good game for enhancing number sense. So if you think your child lacks a little bit in that aspect, playing this game could really help. To boost spatial sense, magnetic cubes, something like this, building blocks, Legos, anything like that could really help kids really get a hands-on idea about how things move around in the real world. For focus, I know that's definitely something that some kids may struggle with. Sequence for Kids is a really good game. They really help build focus for kids, whether it be solving a complex puzzle or something like Sudoku, something like that. Yeah, so while we are approaching the end of today's presentation, let's have some 3 do's and don'ts that we want to leave for today. So prepare an interactive teaching plan for our kids, right? Don't just lecture from a topic. Learn good teaching habits and don't teach from an adult perspective. Sometimes your kids might not understand, even though you think it's obvious. And finally, be patient when teaching, right? Don't assume things are obvious. And there's many ways that there are different ways to explain different ideas to different people. Okay, so at Think Academy, we recommend learning common sense. We need a lot of common sense for these IQ tests, so we recommend learning it through books and daily life. But we also have a pre-K course called Ability, right? In this course, we teach four main abilities: observation, expression, memory, and concentration, right? We use different games and different presentations to help them really express these ideas, as well as three math-related abilities: number sense, logical reasoning, and spatial reasoning that they might see on these IQ tests or any tests in the future. Okay, so we also here at Think Academy offer a 7 abilities assessment, which is kind of a private school mock interview, which is only available at the Cupertino campus. So we offer both a group interview as well as a one-on-one interview. And there's more information down here if you scan this QR code. So the group interview, it really tests their social ability, right? Self-introduction, communication, discipline, and interaction with other students. Whereas the one-on-one interview evaluates whether they are academically ready, right? So something like language, we would talk about writing and spelling, evaluating how they express themselves. And then for the math section, we would talk about, their number sense, if we do some simple calculations, recognizing shapes, things like that. And for the Thinkability pre-K course, as I was talking about earlier, it is available at the Palo Alto campus, and it is actually starting this weekend. So we will learn about patterns and animals in our first lesson. Future lessons also contain something like talking about directions, so teaching them about left or right or up or down, and also counting, but not just normal counting, right? Not just 1, 2, 3, but also we can count in twos, right? 2, 4, 6, we can count in twos. There's also more information down here for that. Okay. And yeah, thank you everybody for coming today. If you want more information or if you have any questions, please feel free to ask right now. I also have my contact information here for everybody. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yes, of course, no worries.